The amount of top-notch recruits that Hugh Freeze is having on campus every day is ridiculous.
Freezing temperatures are likely for several hours inland and a few hours closer to the coast.
Yes.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zac Blackerby. Thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. Happy Cruton Thursday to all who celebrate as we are hanging out with John Garcia, Locked On Recruiting Insider. Man, there's been just an incredible list of, top-notch 4-star, top-notch 5-star, top-notch 4-star over and over and over again that's visiting Auburn over the last few weeks, really since spring practice has started, John. What are some of your bigger takeaways when kind of seeing this list form over time?
Well, first of all, it's another validator, another set of confirmation tools relative to Hugh Freeze and this overall approach to be this organized and have almost kind of a planned attack by the day relative to hosting all of these recruits, which is, this week's a very popular high school spring break week. And Auburn is clearly taking advantage with a lot of the area talent coming back to campus. I think it shows you the organization and just how widespread this attack has been from Auburn's perspective. So yeah, it's not going to be all the things we heard the last couple of years under Brian Harsin. Yeah. It's not going to be a lack of effort. It's not going to be a lack of ties. It's not going to be a lack of checking in or trying to push for these kids to come back to campus. This is something that's already being executed at a very high level. Most of the kids we'll talk about today, Zach, are making their second, third, fourth visits to Auburn. I think only one of them that you sent me hasn't been there yet, but now that box is getting checked. So, the whole foundation of recruiting nowadays is obviously getting those interests and offers out there. And then the next step is getting them to campus. And it sounds so simple and logical and linear, but for a lot of schools, that is the barrier. When do you get these kids on campus? Auburn seemingly isn't relying on official visits to do it either. I think that's the difference between a program that is going to be very proactive from a recruiting standpoint. So again, it's just more confirmation that this isn't just a flash in the pan, hey, let's push for a couple weeks, couple months kind of deal from Hugh Freeze. This is what we should start expecting basically year round. And spring practice is always a time where you want to bring great talent to your campus because they get a feel for school and all those fun things, but they also get that action. They also get to see their potential position coach or coordinator at work, in addition to seeing obviously a fresh look at the current roster.
Yeah, and John, I mean, I've been told and read reports that, there'll be people like zooming in during practice or whatever. And during a drill, he'll look at the, I guess, phone or whatever it is. Like, hey, this is what we'd have you be doing. And it's like, if I'm a kid and I'm seeing that, there's no way the folks that Auburn are competing with, the Kirby Smarts and the Nick Sabans, I don't buy that they're doing that at this point.
Yeah, that's tough. That's tough. Obviously, when you're trying to ascend to that level, there's always going to be kind of natural pushback, but it starts there. It starts with the effort, and it's including kids that are being courted by Georgia and or committed to Alabama. So tangibly, Auburn is getting into the game more and more for these recruits. It's not an overnight fix, but that's certainly the end game, is to be in that same conversation for sure. I don't even think Hugh Freeze would deny that himself if you asked him.
No, I mean, he's been pretty clear. The 24 and 25 classes are going to make or break his tenure at Auburn. And so how does he respond to that? It's almost this controlled desperation of I'm not accepting failure here. And it's awesome. I mean, he's doing stuff. I know you mentioned the last few years under Harsin, but I don't think Auburn's ever had a coach that just thinks about recruiting as much as Hugh Freeze has.
Yeah, I'm in my time covering, this part of the business. I hadn't seen it, that the effort there from the head coach on down it's something that's also contagious, right? All the assistants are like, hey, I should probably be in contact with more guys than the head coach, but it doesn't look like they're winning a lot of those battles, because it's not just quarterbacks or offensive players like we talked about. It's secondary players and defensive linemen. Everybody is hearing from Hugh specifically among those that are high on the board. So yeah, you've got to present in that light, because from the recruiting perspective, it hits different when the head man is talking to you. I talked to a kid recently who visited a couple schools. One of them, he saw the head coach. One of them, he didn't. And it felt like he was talking about that school at a lesser level. So that stuff really matters when the head coach is putting in that specific and personal effort, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the guys that we've talked about a few times here, John, and a guy that Auburn fans have really been focusing on, one, because I think he fits as far as like what an Auburn guy would look like, but also he's a local guy. When you talk about Joseph Phillips, 4-star linebacker from Tuskegee, just a few minutes away from Auburn, and it kind of seemed like it was a done deal. And then he wanted to take more visits. So he was on Auburn's campus March 1st. And since then, he's visited, I believe it's FSU and Clemson. Where are we with Joseph Phillips? Should Auburn people be concerned that he's looking elsewhere? Is Auburn still in the lead and he's just being thorough? Where are we with Joseph Phillips?
I think probably the last point. This is a kid who's obviously familiar with Auburn pre and post Hugh Freeze, and he's already made multiple trips under this administration to build that theoretical lead that Auburn has had with him. So when the other offers started to come in end of last year into the new year, you just knew, even if he committed to Auburn, you just knew at some point a kid like that was at least going to take a look at some of these other offers. It's again, you mentioned it. It's Clemson, it's Florida State. I think Georgia's talking to him, Alabama's talking to him. So it's not like he's got Auburn and a bunch of small stuff like we saw with maybe JC Hart last year. This is a different type of situation. A lot of schools have jumped in on this kid. So you understand, with so much familiarity with Auburn, while he would continue to look elsewhere. But here's the thing. He's never really talked down on his feeling for Auburn, even after some of these trips. And he keeps setting more Auburn trips thereafter. I think he set another trip for this week or so, and then he's coming back for, of course, the spring game. So when kids start to completely overhaul their visit plans, but then they come back to that one school consistently, it's obviously going to be hard for anybody to catch Auburn in this race. And you want them to do the due diligence now, as opposed to if he's committed, just optically and perceptionally, it's a little easier to navigate. So I'm sure Auburn is comfortable with him taking these trips, but I don't think pushing back a timeline or a decision time frame is going to hurt Auburn's chances, unless it's maybe after the season signing day, way down the line. But if he's going to do something sooner rather than later, which it looks like that's still the plan, I'd still feel really good from Auburn's perspective.
Yeah, that's generally the feeling. It's good to hear. All right, so could Auburn flip a top Alabama wide receiver commit? We'll discuss it in just a moment right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show brought to you by our friends at the FanDuel Sportsbook. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. As this drops Thursday morning, Auburn still a 0.5-point dog against the Iowa Hawkeyes in the NCAA tournament. If you think that's disrespectful and you're like, you know what? No, there's no way Auburn loses later today. Be sure to put your money where your mouth is and head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon. And they also have a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. So bonus bets back if that first bet doesn't win. FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Perry Thompson, a 4-star wide receiver commit to Alabama, but it looks like Auburn's making a push for this kid, and he's listening. He's listening to what they have to say, clearly.
Yeah, and he's taking visits. I think that's the theme of today's show, obviously, but he's tangibly getting up to Auburn. So it's not like he's just saying, hey, I'm answering Marcus Davis's phone calls. No, he's reciprocating a lot of that interest. And I think when you visit for spring ball at a position like wide receiver, you really do get a true sense of what you're going to deal with every day from a positional coaching standpoint. And we've talked about the pluses with Marcus as a recruiter and as a coach. Youth has a lot to do with it, and the ability to resonate with younger players is something that is starting to rub off on these Auburn receiver targets. It seems like collectively there's a higher level of confidence to bring a lot of these guys in. And that said, not going to be easy, right? It's not the only program trying to flip Perry from Alabama.
Right.
Obviously, in-state kid down in the 251, so it's never going to be easy in that regard. However, he's still taking visits and still has admitted the door is open. And I think Auburn and Tennessee are both trying to continue to push for more and more visits out of this kid. And look, you understand why there's more interest in Auburn under this administration for a receiver in particular, right? This is a big-bodied, 6'2", 6'3" kid out of Foley. Right. So you already know when he talks to Hugh Freeze, the names that are going to pop up, the DK Metcalfs and the A.J. Browns of the world. Big body receivers fit in this offense to a different degree. So that's something that is continuing to capture his attention. And now visiting for spring practice, you could start to see some of that being implemented along with a young, energetic position coach that you resonate with just a little bit more. So, yeah, I think this is an ongoing storyline to track. Won't be something that ends anytime soon, but these are the type of kids you got to keep pushing for until the final buzzer, and Auburn apparently is going to stay in that mix.
Yeah, I think that's great. And then, can Marcus Davis pull one of these out, right? We've talked about this with top receivers that Auburn's not giving up on that are committed. Georgia, we mentioned him at some point. And it's like, can Marcus Davis pull one of these off? Because it kind of feels like you only need one of them to really kind of get things going, and I think kind of to set your feet as this up-and-coming recruiter that we talked about when Marcus Davis was hired to be Auburn's wide receivers coach. And, maybe it will be Perry Thompson. That would be huge for him as far as, him kind of proving that he belongs, right? I mean, this is his first SEC job at this level. That would be huge for him. It'd be huge for Auburn. And, I think you get bonus points, the fact that he was committed to Alabama too.
Of course, always in that rivalry. And look, one of these dominoes is going to break Auburn's way at the receiver position. But yeah, getting that first one seemingly is the hardest one, just like we talk about with recruits getting scholarship offers. But look, between flipping potential receiver recruits, of course, Cam Coleman is right there at Phoenix City as well. You've got to hit on one of these bigger, more impressive blue chip, legit blue chip type receivers in this class. And I believe Auburn will at the end of the day.
Should there be any panic among Auburn fans for Cam Coleman? A lot of people typing in all caps to me, where is Cam? Where has he been? Are you hearing anything on that front?
Nothing incredibly new. He's got a pretty, strong group of programs that are coming after him, and he's starting to formulate those official visit plans. So I think that's sort of the next layer of that conversation. How far away does he want to branch out in this thing, or is it going to be billed as sort of a classic, Southern battle in the end with, Auburn, Georgia, Bama, Clemson are right in the thick of it. I tend to think it's going to stay sort of in that lane, though Penn State and a couple other schools are really trying to change his mind there.
All right, let's head over to Lawrenceville, Georgia. Justin Greene, the 4-star defensive lineman, big guy. Looking at On3's projection machine, Auburn is second, I believe, to South Carolina, if I recall correctly. Tell me about Justin Greene and kind of what Auburn's doing to get him.
Yeah, versatile, kind of a tweener defensive lineman that's going to have some more value in his game in this modern day and age when you're rushing the passer from the interior just a little bit more. Yeah, I think South Carolina early did a really nice job of prioritizing him. Look, Atlanta area guy, that is a true pipeline city for South Carolina, just like it is for Auburn and Tennessee and everyone else in the SEC. But South Carolina latched on early with that Shane Beamer staff. And look, they're recruiting really well. That's another program similar to Auburn's where top down, the effort has been elevated under this staff versus previous. So I think early on, South Carolina did a really nice job with Justin, got him on campus a bunch, I think for multiple games last year. But since the new year, Auburn has now started to dig into a bit of a counter here. Georgia's involved as well, but Auburn's got a couple visits to its name, and he's already talking about making a return to Auburn here down the line. So Auburn's going to be right in the thick of this one going forward. You don't discount Clemson, which has also prioritized him fairly early on, and then we just mentioned Georgia. Anytime they're involved with a defensive lineman in particular, that's going to be tough in-state or otherwise. But look, Auburn is in this game, proximity to home. I think it's probably second closest to UGA. So that's going to factor in there as well. Because if you look at the schools Justin is considering, they're all sort of in that same footprint, within a 4 or 5 mile radius from his hometown there in Lawrenceville.
Auburn's new defensive lineman, as we talk about Justin Greene here, Auburn new defensive line coach, Jeremy Garrett, is he popping up at all as this kind of solid recruiter? I mean, what he did at Liberty was incredible statistically. Like, that unit's really, really good. And just talking to, Jason Jones came on this show to talk, and he talked up his position coach. We saw him win some battles in the transfer portal. We haven't really seen him kind of have a 4 or 5 star kid, come through the high school ranks yet. What are your thoughts on him early in his Auburn tenure?
Well, yeah, like you said, the Liberty track record speaks for itself. And look, that footprint from a recruiting standpoint is not dissimilar to Auburn. You're still probably starting your board in Atlanta and branching out from there. But I think the Liberty cachet brings him more of a developmental stamp. So now it's going to be on the other side, like you said, the talent acquisition side. Hey, can you go in and compete with the big boys? And I think, the early returns from watching these recruits talk about Garrett in spring practice is they do like the approach. Younger guy, so it's not rah, curse you out, talk about your mama negatively to motivate you. It's more modern. It is more respectful, eye-to-eye, man-to-man type of coaching, and that is
a little NFL vibe to it too.
Exactly, very business-like, much more preferred nowadays to the recruit. When I was coming up, every coach was cursing me out. That's just, it's not the style that works anymore. So spring practice, again, this is one of the better examples of all these position coaches that, you do get that true sense, and kids are already reacting positively to how Garrett is going to present himself. So it's not for everyone. Some will prefer the old school style or the more rah style. But for the most part, these Southern kids are going to like that respectful man-to-man, hey, let me get you better. This is how. So seeing that in live and in color, I think is really important for these recruits. So yeah, still TBD on his recruiting returns, but the approach is there. And Auburn, again, just like we said with the receivers, they're involved with a lot of these premier, front 7 guys. And Garrett is doing a good job, at least from a time management standpoint with that.
Yeah. All right, Auburn really putting the full court press on a guy that a lot of people thought would kind of be trending towards LSU. He was on Auburn's campus earlier this week. We discussed that in just a moment with John right here on Locked On Auburn. I want to encourage you to join the Locked On Auburn Discord. It is free. All you have to do is click the link in the episode description down below. Jalen Crawford, the 4-star cornerback, John. LSU seems to be the favorite as things currently sit. Another Georgia kid. But he said at his visit, which, I always kind of go back and forth on how much you can put stock in some of these quotes, but
they're all good visits.
He told Auburn reporters that Auburn's definitely up there. You buy that? What are your thoughts on Auburn's recruitment of Jaylin Crawford?
I am. I think there are certain position groups. We talk about running back and quarterback with this coaching staff. I think the secondary group always feels like it's got a higher ceiling, especially if you start to hear from the tandem coaches. If you're hearing from Crime and Zach Etheridge, I think your stock is just higher in terms of the possibilities of ending up there at Auburn. And that is some of what Crawford is starting to hear. Again, recent visitor, close to home, all those same Georgia area recruit applications apply here. And I think, LSU built up an early perceptional lead. They got in on him early on, and he reciprocated with multiple visits out there. But again, Auburn is starting to claw back. And we should, remind the audience that even compared to LSU and South Carolina and some of these schools that are under relatively new administrations, Auburn is much newer in that regard. So you are kind of always playing a little bit of catch up with some of these guys that have been, 3-4 star guys for multiple years like Crawford has. So there's always going to be that element of playing from behind with this class of 2024 relative to the other coaching staffs that are involved in these recruitments. So he's a good one to point out, though, because, it looks like Auburn is starting to make up ground here in a hurry. And that's another one where he's already confirmed, I'll definitely take that official to Auburn. I think only a couple other schools have that at their back at this point. So it's going to be an LSU, Auburn, maybe Clemson battle going forward. And you wonder, could anyone else start to factor into that race? I think Florida is trying to get them on campus here soon as well. So this is going to be maybe a classic SEC battle with a sprinkle of Clemson in there.
Yeah, so that's going to be big for Jaylin Crawford, the cornerback commit. Amaris Williams, the name of a four-star edge out of North Carolina, Clinton, North Carolina. Seems like this guy's a riser, but Auburn's certainly interested, along with a bunch of other schools that are slowly hopping on the Amaris Williams train. 6'3", 250. You absolutely love the frame on this kid, John. But as much of new schools kind of get these waves of offers towards, headed his direction, where does Auburn sit, you think?
Yeah, well, there was an offer that came in and resonated immediately for Amaris, to the point where he's set the visit basically at that point. I think it's going to be a multi-day trip there to the Plains this weekend, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that's the first scrimmage for Auburn. So all the stuff we talk about that resonates during the practices, it goes up a level or two for the scrimmages, right? Because now it's in game, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or simulated. Right. In game, so
you're getting You're getting the front seven rotation. You're seeing a little bit more of that at play, as opposed to just watching more instruction and kind of a slower paced environment. So that's always a good time to bring recruits in. Although again, Auburn's been bringing in recruits every single day. He's the only one that hadn't quite been to Auburn. So a lot of these schools are starting to offer, and he's starting to reciprocate with some visits, because as far as I've seen, Amaris hasn't really been outside of that sort of North Carolina corridor. He's been to UNC and NC State and ECU and I think Tennessee, which borders it. And that's kind of it. So he's got to get further into that traditional SEC footprint as his stock rises here this spring. So Auburn getting the first crack at it among those schools, I think is a big deal, especially for a multi-day trip, especially coinciding with a scrimmage. So I think that he'll get the full court red carpet treatment or orange carpet treatment when he's in town for sure. Yeah, and a few of you asked me when the first scrimmage was or is. It is Friday. So, John's all over it. All right, so that's for Amaris Williams, the four-star edge from Clinton, North Carolina. Last guy we'll talk about, John, Camarion Franklin, four-star defensive lineman, Mississippi kid, visited Auburn earlier in the week, and same stuff. Sounds like he enjoyed his time here.
Yeah, this was important because even though he's a Mississippi kid and a well-known recruit, this guy's probably had 5 stars by his name for 2 years now, he hadn't really visited Auburn from a recruiting perspective. So getting that first or second trip behind him was going to be really critical in just trying to stay afloat in this recruitment, because this one is truly national. You've got USC and Oregon and Ohio State, as well as the entire SEC and ACC. So this is going to be a national long recruiting battle. So you kind of had to hit step one here and get that first visit in. By all indication, it went well. He's already talking about a return trip to Auburn. And look, with Mississippi natives, this is going to hit even more differently, because, the Hugh Freeze era at Ole Miss was arguably, the highest high for that program, since Eli Manning was the QB. So that is always going to resonate with kids from that state. And it's still a border state. So you expect Auburn to have a really strong run in Mississippi. And naturally, you start at the top with the number one player in the state. But Mississippi's loaded. So I do think Auburn's going to splash in that state overall. Obviously, Camarion Franklin would be the ideal start to that process. But having that history in the state, in particular, with a couple of Mississippi natives on the staff, is always going to play well. Because as you know, Zach, hard to go into that state and pull recruits out without some real connections and areas where you resonate with these recruits. But luckily for Auburn, they've got that with Franklin.
Yeah, that'd be huge. No question about it. John Garcia, thank you so much for your time as always, my friend. How can people check out everything you've got going on?
Yeah, we're hanging out with you guys a lot on the Locked On Podcast Network, of course. And then we're talking ball at every level on Twitter. John Garcia _JR is where you can find me there.
All right, we will obviously recap tonight's action as Auburn takes on Iowa in the first round of the NCAA tournament. We'll go live as soon as that game is done. And we'll talk a little bit more football, probably preview the scrimmage on tomorrow morning's show. We'll see you then. This has been Locked On Auburn.